In a small, dimly lit room, a young woman named Eliza lay on a crude wooden bed, her face contorted in pain. Her mother, a weathered old woman with deep-set wrinkles, stood over her, muttering ancient prayers and applying heated cloths to her belly. The room was filled with the heavy scent of herbs and the sounds of Eliza's labored breathing. This was not an uncommon scene in medieval times, where childbirth was a perilous journey that many women did not survive. Eliza's husband, Thomas, paced outside the room, his hands clasped in prayer. He was a simple farmer, and this was their first child. If all went well, it would be a blessing, but if it did not, it would be a tragedy that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The lives of medieval women were often defined by the dangers and uncertainties of childbirth, a stark reminder of their secondary status in a world dominated by men. But the challenges for women in the Middle Ages were not limited to the perils of childbirth. They were also bound by a web of social, legal, and religious constraints that often left them with little autonomy. In the eyes of the church and the law, women were often seen as inferior, their bodies and minds considered less pure and less capable than those of men. Religious hierarchies, at least those with significant political power, were run exclusively by men. Universities where theologies, philosophies, and sciences were discussed were male-only domains. Even the laws of the land, as recorded in court documents, often used male pronouns, suggesting that women had little to no independent status. Women were frequently referred to through their husbands or fathers, as if they were property rather than individuals. Yet, despite the bleak outlook, the lives of medieval women were not uniform. Geography played a significant role in shaping their experiences. In the southern regions of Europe, such as Italy, Spain, and southern France, young women were often married off at a young age, sometimes in their late teens, to men who were often a decade older. High-status diplomatic marriages could see girls as young as 12, like Blanche of Castile, forced into unions with boys of the same age. These early marriages often meant a quick transition into motherhood, a role that was both demanding and dangerous. In the northern regions, such as London, Ghent, and Bruges, women typically married later in life, often in their early 20s. Some even chose to marry in their 40s or 50s, forming unions based on companionship rather than the urgency of bearing children. This allowed many women to work and earn their own wages, forging more independent paths. For women in the Muslim Middle East and North Africa, the situation was different yet again. While Islamic law allowed men to take multiple wives, this was not a common practice. Women were often expected to be submissive and demure, confined to specific areas of the home, and required to cover their bodies in public. However, these restrictions also created unique opportunities. Muslim women could gather in female-only spaces, a privilege denied to their European counterparts. These spaces were often lively and engaging, as depicted in a 13th century manuscript showing a group of women listening to a speech, their veiled faces animated in conversation. Class also played a crucial role in the lives of medieval women. Wealthy women, despite being often forced into arranged marriages, had more resources and influence. They could use family money to support personal or social causes, commission artisans, and even found religious or civic institutions. Some, like Arwa al-Salehi, the Queen of Yemen, and Irene, the Byzantine Empress, achieved significant political power, defying the gender norms of their time. For those who sought a life away from the constraints of marriage and motherhood, the option of becoming a nun was available. While this path was far from emancipatory, it at least offered a life free from the dangers of childbirth. Women like Saint Wilgefortz, who chose a life of devotion to Christ, were venerated for their piety and willingness to challenge the status quo. In the realm of folklore and literature, the roles of men and women were often reversed, reflecting the complex and sometimes contradictory attitudes of the time. Women were portrayed as both passive vessels and dangerous seductresses, capable of inflicting harm on men. This duality is evident in tales where women are depicted as using sharp objects to trap or castrate men, or in comedic illustrations where nuns are shown plucking penises from trees. The penis, a symbol of male identity and power, was often the subject of boasting and mockery. In one Icelandic saga, a maid's disappointment in the small size of a hero's member highlights the importance placed on physical attributes in defining masculinity. Despite the challenges, the lives of medieval women were far from uniform. They were shaped by geography, class, and individual choices, and their stories reveal a rich tapestry of experiences that defy simple categorization. In the medieval world, the way people thought about body parts, especially the genitals, was quite different from today. For Jews and Muslims, the ritual of circumcision, known as Brit Milah for Jews and Kitten for Muslims, played a significant role in their community. This practice wasn't just about health. It was a way to show that a person belonged to their faith. For Jews, it was a direct command from God, following the example of Abraham, and it was a moment when a boy could be named. Rabbis believed that the blood from circumcision had special spiritual powers, and sometimes even poured it on the ground in front of a synagogue. Interestingly, some Christians wondered if Jesus, who was born to a Jewish family, left his foreskin behind as a holy relic when he ascended to heaven. This idea was controversial, but it didn't stop some people from claiming to have found the holy foreskin. Cities like Antwerp, Santiago de Compostela, and Metz all had their own versions of this relic. One particularly famous foreskin was said to have been kept by the Virgin Mary in a small bag, which she then gave to St. John. The bag was supposedly passed to an angel, who conveniently dropped it in the court of Emperor Charlemagne, where it was displayed as a precious treasure. Despite the religious significance of the penis, the Middle Ages also had strict rules about sexual behavior, especially for men who loved other men. This kind of love was seen as a sin and a deviation from God's plan. Men who engaged in these relationships were called sodomites, named after the biblical city of Sodom, which was destroyed for its sins. In some places, like the Venetian Republic, being a sodomite could mean a death sentence, while in others, like the German Empire, the laws were less severe. Even in places where it was less strictly punished, being gay was still a dangerous and secretive life. Some writers, like Richard of Devizes, mentioned effeminate boys and man-lovers in their chronicles, but always in a negative way. For women who loved other women, the situation was even worse. Lesbians were rarely mentioned in medieval literature, and when they were, their relationships were often portrayed as chaste and loyal, rather than erotic. A story from the Encyclopedia of Pleasure tells of two princesses, Hind and Alzarka, who fell in love and founded a monastery together, but their love was described as a model of loyalty, not open affection. One bodily function that everyone shared was the need to urinate. Medieval doctors believed that urine could reveal a lot about a person's health. They would look at the color, smell, and even taste it to make their diagnoses. These doctors often carried round-bottomed flasks to collect urine samples, and these flasks became a symbol of their profession. In art, a doctor examining a urine flask was a common image, sometimes even used to make fun of them. For example, in the stained glass windows of York Minster, monkeys are shown inspecting urine bottles, a playful jab at the serious business of medicine. Urine was so important that some medical books even had illustrations of urine trees, where different colors and qualities of urine were mapped out like the branches of a tree. Each branch represented a different diagnosis, from simple indigestion to more serious conditions like impending death. Doctors would shake, stir, and sniff the urine to get a full picture of the patient's health. The genitals, in general, were seen as more than just body parts. They were symbols of identity, faith, and even power. For example, the Holy Roman Emperor Friedrich III's foot became a symbol of his failing health. When his foot turned black, a group of doctors from across Europe gathered to decide what to do. They eventually decided to amputate the foot, a procedure that was undoubtedly painful and risky. The operation was performed by the surgeon Hans Seyf, who later wrote about it, perhaps to protect himself from blame if the emperor didn't recover. Despite the pain and risk, the foot was a crucial part of the emperor's body, a point of contact between him and his people. Feet also had a special place in medieval culture, especially in acts of loyalty. Kneeling to kiss a ruler's foot was a sign of deep respect and allegiance. This practice was common in the West, though Muslim leaders often avoided it. The Pope, in particular, expected rulers to kiss his foot as a sign of their loyalty. One famous story involves the Viking leader Rollo, who, instead of bending down to kiss the foot of King Charles the Simple, had one of his men lift the king's foot to his lips, cleverly turning the tables on the king and showing his own power. These stories show how medieval people saw the body in a way that might seem strange to us today. Body parts were not just physical. They were also symbols of faith, loyalty, and identity. Whether it was the penis, the foot, or even a simple drop of urine, every part of the body had a story to tell. In the grand and often mysterious world of the Middle Ages, few customs were as intricate and loaded with meaning as the foot-kissing rituals of the Byzantine emperors. These rituals were not just simple acts of respect. They were a complex dance of social hierarchy and political strategy. The court of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, was a place where every gesture and every word carried weight. The emperors who ruled from this ancient city had a unique way of showing their power and receiving the homage of their subjects. The court's traditions were meticulously recorded in a 14th century book called On Dignities and Offices. This book details the various forms of proskyneses, the ritual of bowing to the emperor. Depending on one's rank and the emperor's favor, the level of deference one had to show could vary widely. For example, when important figures like the leaders of the Genoese and Venetian communities visited the emperor, the treatment they received could be quite different. The Genoese, who were generally on good terms with the emperor, were allowed to show the highest form of respect. They would enter the imperial presence and, with their companions, prostrate themselves and kiss the emperor's foot, hand, and cheek. This was a sign of deep loyalty and respect. On the other hand, the Venetians, who had recently been at odds with the emperor, were treated with more caution. When their leader came to the court, he and his companions were only required to kneel, and they were not allowed to kiss the emperor's foot at all. This subtle difference in treatment reflected the political tensions of the time. These rituals were not just for the powerful. Even simple laypeople were taught how to show respect through various prayers and artistic representations. One such example is the advice given by the Netherlandish author and clergyman Willem Jordaens. He wrote about the spiritual practice of prostrating oneself at the feet of Christ, using vivid imagery to guide the faithful. Willem suggested that one should mentally throw themselves at Christ's feet, moisten his feet with tears, and dry them with one's hair. The act of kissing Christ's feet with one's mouth was a symbol of the inner desire to live a life in accordance with divine truth. Artists also played a crucial role in making these practices accessible. The Sienese artist Duccio di Buonensegna captured this devotion in his painting, the Madonna dei Francescani. In this painting, the Virgin Mary is depicted holding the Christ child, surrounded by angels. In the lower left-hand corner, a group of Franciscan monks is shown prostrating themselves before the Virgin. One monk is just about to kiss her slipper, his face wide-eyed and smiling, as if in a moment of deep spiritual connection. The shoes themselves, which are often overlooked, tell their own stories. Medieval shoes were typically simple and practical, but they could also be symbols of status and fashion. Shoes from this period were often made using the turnshoe method, where the leather was formed over a foot-shaped mold and then turned inside out. These shoes were delicate and often worn with pattens, which were thicker soles that provided protection when walking outdoors. By the 12th century, cobblers began to incorporate waterproof layers and more complex styles, leading to a wider variety of shoes. Styles like buskins, ankle shoes, and botox became popular, and materials like cordovan leather, imported from southern Spain, were highly prized. One particularly extravagant style was the poulain, a shoe with an extremely long, pointed toe. These shoes, sometimes stuffed with moss or hair to maintain their shape, were a status symbol among the aristocracy. However, they were also criticized by the church for their extravagance, and were seen as a symbol of moral decay. Bare feet, on the other hand, were often associated with crime and punishment. Stripping prisoners of their shoes was a common tactic to slow them down if they tried to escape. Criminals might be forced to walk long distances barefoot as part of their punishment, and in some cases, Jews were made to stand on pigskin while taking oaths in court. Despite the negative connotations, bare feet could also be a sign of penitence. Medieval kings would sometimes wash the feet of beggars during Holy Week, following Christ's example, and monks and nuns would wash each other's feet as a gesture of spiritual equality. In the larger context, these rituals and practices were not just about the feet themselves, but about the deeper meanings they carried. Whether it was the elaborate foot kissing of the Byzantine court or the humble foot washing of the monasteries, these acts were a way of expressing respect, humility, and a connection to the divine. They were a part of the rich tapestry of medieval life, where every gesture and every object had a story to tell. William thought he was some distance away from the sea, but it's hard to say exactly how far. In the Middle Ages, people didn't have standardized units for measuring distance. Terms like miles and toises could mean different things in different places. For example, a Swiss toise was almost, but not quite, the same as a Danish road. An Arabian mil was based on distance, while a Persian farsang was based on how long it took to travel. A Portuguese lagoa could be shorter or longer than a Spanish legua, depending on where in Spain you ask. Most measurements in the Middle Ages were based on the human body, especially the foot. Latin geometry books from around the 11th century listed units like the half-foot demi-pes, foot-pes, and step or pace passes. A mile was 1,000 paces, and a land league was the distance a person could walk in an hour at an average speed. These units matched some older classical names, and made it easier to measure common journeys. Most people traveled by foot because owning a horse, keeping it fed, and buying a carriage were too expensive for the average person. The Roman Empire had a network of well-kept roads for travel, but after it fell, roads became less safe and well-maintained. Travelers often wrote about the dangers of poor roads and highwaymen. They described broken wheels, cracked axles, and being robbed at knife point. Some local laws even required trees and bushes to be cut back from roads to prevent bandits from hiding and ambushing travelers. Traveling by river or sea was faster over long distances, but not always safer. Storms, choppy waters, and shipwrecks were common dangers. The Venetian Republic, a city-state that relied on trade, had large shipyards and early banks that developed insurance and credit to help traders manage the risks of long voyages. Sailors faced the most extreme dangers, as described in an old Gaelic poem about a storm on the Irish Sea. A great storm raged on the sea, bold and fierce across its high borders. The wind rose, winter's fury killed us, it came across the sea. When the wind came from the north, it drove the dark, fierce waves towards the southern world, battling against the sky. The waves crashed with great force across every broad river mouth. The wind came, winter's fury killed us. Around the tip of Scotland and the land of Scotland, mountains poured forth streams. Son of God, the Father, with vast hosts, save me from the horror of the storm. Righteous Lord of the feast, save me from the terrible blast, from hell with its high storms. Despite the dangers, travelers had several tools to help them navigate. The compass was widely used in Europe from the 13th century, and local knowledge of traditional routes was passed down through generation. The astrolabe, a circular instrument used to measure the positions of stars, was also common. It helped travelers determine their location by calculating latitude and local time. Geoffrey Chaucer even wrote a guide for his son or godson on how to use an astrolabe. Most surviving astrolabes are made of metal and are beautifully decorated, showing the advanced knowledge and craftsmanship of their makers. One Persian astrolabe from around 1000 AD is particularly intricate, with a detailed riteh and an inscription naming its makers, Ahmad and Muhammad, from Isfahan. Not everyone stayed in one place. Soldiers marched long distances, and many people traveled for religious reasons. Pilgrimages to holy sites were common, attracting both rich and poor. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, one of the earliest Christian basilicas, was frequently visited by pilgrims. Built in 326 AD during the reign of Emperor Constantine, it was renovated and redecorated multiple times throughout the Middle Ages. Today, it is shared by different Christian denominations, and the columns are adorned with paintings of saints and the Virgin Mary, paid for by pilgrims from various parts of the world. Some paintings show figures like John the Baptist and Saint Sabas, while others represent saints from distant lands, like Saint Olaf and Saint Knut from Scandinavia. Some travelers, like Benjamin of Tudela, wrote detailed accounts of their journeys. Benjamin, a Jewish author from Spain, traveled through Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, documenting the places and people he encountered. He described the turreted houses of Pisa, the imperial palaces of Greece, and the bustling cities of the Middle East. After nearly 8 years of travel, he returned to Spain and published his travels, ending with a plea for the gathering of the Jewish people from all nations. Other famous travelers, like Marco Polo and Muhammad al-Muqaddasi, also wrote about their adventures. Their accounts revealed the rich cultural exchanges and diverse landscapes of the medieval world. Some of these accounts inspired more fantastical travel books, like the Travels of John Manville, which may have been more imagination than fact. Whether accurate or fictional, these travelogues offer a glimpse into the adventurous spirit and curiosity of medieval people. The story of medieval bodies is far from over. Even today, as we look at the past, we discover more and more about how people back then saw themselves and the world around them. Their bodies were not just flesh and bone. They were a canvas for all sorts of ideas and beliefs. From the theories of the ancients to the sensual experiences of daily life, from the stages of religious and sexual identities to the beauty and pain they felt, the medieval body was everything to everyone. People in the Middle Ages were always curious about the future. They wondered what would happen to their bodies after death. Some believed in the end of the world, with thunderous revelations and the revival of the dead. Others wrote fantastical stories, like the tale of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, who fell asleep in a cave and woke up 300 years later. Medieval philosophers asked deep questions about change, fate, and free will. They wanted to know if the future was set in stone or if they could shape it themselves. By the 1500s, the world was changing rapidly. In 1492, Spanish ships sailed across the Atlantic and found a new continent. Portuguese sailors rounded the southern tip of Africa and opened up new sea routes to the Far East. In 1522, a ship proved that the Earth was a sphere. The Ottoman Empire expanded, and the Reformation split the Catholic Church. Medicine was also evolving, with new ingredients and experimental techniques. These changes were not predicted by medieval thinkers, but they were built on the knowledge and ideas that had been preserved for centuries. Without the work of medieval scholars, the early modern era would not have had the foundation to build upon. The Middle Ages were a time of continuity and reflection, and these qualities were essential for the dramatic changes that followed. So, what is the future of our understanding of medieval bodies? It's a mix of looking back and looking forward. We can use the slow, careful process of studying art, poetry, religious texts, and medical practices, while also using new technologies to uncover more about the past. We have more medieval remains to study, like the skeletons found in London, Paris, Aberdeen, and Rome. These remains tell us a lot about the lives of people long ago. By examining bones, we can learn about the traumas and diseases they experienced. With advanced DNA analysis, we can even uncover details about their sex, ethnicity, and health. In a way, the past and the future are connected. As we continue to explore the medieval world, we find new insights that can help us understand our own. The medieval body, with all its complexities, is a window into the human experience, and it continues to teach us about what it means to be human. Whether we are studying ancient maps, reading old texts, or analyzing DNA, the story of the medieval body is a story that keeps unfolding, revealing more about the world we live in today.